I feel like a lot of people have things right now that they used to dream about in the past, and they thought that that was going to make them happy, like things in the external world, right? And the ironic part is that like even though they have the stuff that they used to dream about in the past, they're still chasing things right now in the external world that they think are going to make them happy. So why is it that we chase so hard, we grind so hard on things in the external world while at the same time neglecting our inner world?
Profound question. And the Buddha had something to say about it 2,500 years ago. That's part. The brain is designed to chase goals and uh, flee from threats. That's kind of automatic. And the problem is that once we attain the goal, once we get the shiny object, we tend to keep chasing the next one. And we don't slow down enough to internalize the actual experience of satisfaction, usually in small ways. The little things we get done every day, the nice little moments with other people, the sense of our own worth along the way. Those are little jewels, ordinary jewels in the path of life that we just walk past most of the time. And on the other hand, good research shows that when people slow down and take in the good, to grow the good that lasts inside, then they feel increasingly filled up from the inside out, inherently. And then on the basis of that sense of inner fullness already, they have their goals, pursue their ambitions, but without that sense of drivenness and pressure, contraction, and even a kind of subtle desperation in the background.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, like you said, suck at appreciating things. Like, like
That's right.
we tend to not be very,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right.
Why do we suck at that?
It's a great question. We live in a culture that is very fast, so it's presenting the new shiny object continuously, which tends to dislodge the current opportunity for satisfaction, fulfillment, self-worth, that's being held in the neural substrates of working memory. It gets keep knocking it off, so we don't, absorb it. We also live in a go-go culture, so if you see everybody to the left and the right of you chasing, you feel like, whoa, I'm going to get left behind. If I slow down for even 3 breaths to just appreciate what I already have, that. And then I think throw personality into the mix. By myself, tend to be goal directed. See the ball, chase the ball, get the ball, look for the next ball. And it's a little bit like a dog chasing a red ball, right? Hey, doggy, good doggy, but stop chasing the damn ball. You're creating a lot of trouble and you're going to get yourself killed, right? So I relate to this. And I think, at a certain level, we're talking about autonomy. Are you in charge of your own brain? Are you in charge of your life? Or are you going to be manipulated by the culture? Sometimes other people. Stay thirsty, my friends. The world's greatest Dos Equis beer ad. And also, are you going to be manipulated by those old habits in your brain, buried in your brain? And so for me, there's something about, in simple ways, kind of standing up for yourself and deciding, and nothing like a wake-up call in the 20s and 30s, what really matters, and deciding to swerve toward, as the Buddha put it in a proverb a long time ago, a greater happiness over a lesser one.
So how important is that striving though? Because something I know about just being overall happy is, and you hear this from Tony Robbins a lot, is that improvement can almost that dopamine hit of seeing improvements in our life can be very satisfying. So it's not like we don't want to not strive at all, right?
I'm so glad you brought this up. You're exactly right. And that's what's been really interesting to me, and what's the neurobiology, literally, of healthy striving, we could say. And you see people doing this. They talk about flow. You talk about athletes. I'm really into the Golden State Warriors right now, right? You see Steph Curry. He's striving, and he's not upset about it. He's not contracted. He's not hard on himself. He's going for it, but he's going for it like a good coach would encourage him, right? Rather than a kind of mean, tearing him down critic. And that's, to me, the distinction. Are you dreaming big dreams? Are you putting in a day's work? I come from a kind of working class background. My dad was born on a ranch in North Dakota. My mom was, also grew up in poverty, essentially. There's a work ethic. To me, that's important. Do your job. Do your job. And you'll respect yourself for that. Make efforts every day. Do what's under your own control every day. But how do you do that? Do you do that on the basis of those people and those inner voices that tell you that you basically suck and you have to impress everybody newly every day or else, right? Or do you do it on the basis of the wise coaches, guides, encouragers, cheerleaders you've known in your life and those related voices inside yourself? To me, that's the choice. I'll tell you a story. Can I tell you a story about rock climbing?
Yeah.
So long time ago, not too long ago, I was climbing with my friend Bob. We got a guide. We were in Colorado and El Dorado Canyon where the grades are stiff. And I don't know if people listening know much about rock climbing grades, but basically I was in my mid-30s, Bob and I were. And we rolled in, and the difficulty of the first climb we did was 5.8. Kind of remember that number. I totally thrashed. I hung on the rope. I sucked. I was terrible. Bob did it pretty well. So Dave, our guide, then asked us, and we were going to be there for a week, hey, what are your goals for the week? And I said, I'd love to climb 511 before I leave here. 511 is really, really hard. There are even harder grades these days, but 511 in the mid-1980s was a serious grade. And Bob turned to me. He's a high-performing dude at Harvard now. And he said, Hanson, you're insane. You're going to be so mad at yourself because, of course, you're going to fail, and then you'll feel like crap. And I thought, and I said, well, actually, no, it's win-win. It's so unlikely. If I don't make it, no problem. But if I do make it, oh, yeah. So then we spent the next week climbing. And fairly quickly, Bob and Dave got interested in me achieving this personal goal. And we started picking climbs that would be good for me. They weren't too strenuous, but they rewarded cunning and determination, my strengths. And on the very last day, happily, I was able to climb a 511 route without falling. Yay. To me, that's an example of aspiration without attachment. You go for it. And of course, you will be disappointed some if you don't get it, but you go for it, but without, getting all contracted and uptight and self-referential, me, if you don't make it.
Yeah, and I think that really goes into the conversation of where expectations fit into all of this. Like, for example, going into this podcast, if I had the expectation that if this doesn't hit 1 million views, it's a failure, then we're kind of just setting myself up for disappointment because 1 million views is extremely difficult. And so what's the role of expectations in all of this? I feel like that expectations are so important to happiness, right?
And you're really, it's cool to talk with you, just the insight and so on you're bringing up. So you've heard this term, I'm sure. Psychologists like me talk about the distinction between process goals and outcome goals, and also intrinsic values and extrinsic values. Process goals are enjoying the journey along the way, rewarding yourself for bringing your heart to it, working hard, being a stand-up person, having courage along the way, distinct from whatever the results are. There's a proverb essentially that, you can water a fruit tree and take good care of it, but you cannot make it give you an apple. You can tend to the causes. Those are process goals, but you cannot control the results. Whether you get 1 million views or I get 1 million books sold, is, partly dependent on what we do. Those are the causes we tend to. But so much of what shapes reality is totally out of our hands. Intrinsic values are things like, how do I feel rewarded along the way? Extrinsic values would be something like, will my boss give me a new car? And so on. Okay, so what you're getting right there in terms of expectations, what are you focusing on? And what is it you're trying to accomplish? Process goals with intrinsic rewards, that's the sweet spot. Even while we pursue external goals reasonably. Part one. Part two, recent science shows that the brain is a giant expectation machine. It's constantly generating expectations, and then it's comparing current performance against the expectation. So if you meet your expectation, you get that dopamine hit. If you don't make that expectation, dopamine levels slump, and it's a bummer. That's a major simplification of a lot of complexity, but definitely solid and good enough for our purposes. So to me, one of the interesting things in the real world, like I have a business, I have activities, two grown children, in the world, not living in a cave somewhere. How do we, goes back to autonomy and who's in charge? Being in charge yourself in the present. Can we rest in the present, feeling already full, while we strive wisely without getting caught up in the endless becoming process? In other words, focused more on being in the present, through which, efforts and, skillfulness and good character flow, can we rest in being and kind of disengage moment by moment? It's a practice from the machinery of becoming, the expecting machine. That sounds kind of, I don't know, maybe airy-fairy or cosmic, but it's right at the heart of things. And it's also very consistent with, ancient wisdom and so forth. Yeah. What's your sense of this? Can you tell the difference in your own mind as you're hanging out between, am I rested in being or am I rested in becoming?
Well, yeah, it's the difference between in a conversation like this, when you're speaking, me listening to you versus me thinking about what I'm going to say next.
Yeah, super, perfect.
Yeah,
yeah, same.
Yeah, something that that I was thinking about when you were saying this is that I feel like young people are especially unhappy right now because of two reasons. One, I think just when you're young, you tend to have very unrealistic expectations about how life actually goes. And I feel like you get that with age. And also, too, you throw social media in the mix. I mean, the expectations are just completely unrealistic. And you see all these young people being like, if I'm not a millionaire by 25, I'm a failure. When it's like, what percentage of 25-year-olds are millionaires? Like, you're really setting yourself up for failure, right?
Oh, I feel that. Yeah, our son Forrest does our podcast, Being Well, so on. He talks about how in social media we see the highlight reels of everybody else's lives, but we're very aware of the total movie, warts and all, of our own life. So you're right, it creates that social comparison. And as social primates, evolving in small bands of 20, 40, 50 people, including our Stone Age ancestors, for a long, long time, it was necessary and natural to compare yourself to others. Am I getting food? They're getting bananas. Am I getting bananas too? So it's natural to compare ourselves. On the other hand, man, it's so easy to feel like you're less than. I actually had a kind of a realization recently talking with a friend of mine, and I just realized, Rick, it's time to give up caring about impressing anyone. And basically, and part of that, I talk about risking the dreaded experience. What's the dreaded experience if we're not impressing other people, if we're not a millionaire by 25, right? And one way to short circuit that unhealthy striving for yourself is to identify the dreaded experience that unhealthy striving is aimed at avoiding, right? What are you trying to avoid? And then if you can accept what you're trying to avoid, you're free. Autonomy again, freedom, you're free. And so for me, it shows up as kind of like, hey, I accept that I'm not very impressive. And then bingo, freedom from that right there. Yeah. I think there's a lot in what you're saying, and I'll just pause. What do you think? Because I was a young person. I still feel very young at heart. The older I get, the younger I feel somehow. But you're demographically a young person.
Yeah, well, I think something I was thinking about is that topic of like impressing people. It's like you have to think about times in your life where someone impressed you, and like that was cool. Like, yeah, they impressed you, but then like 2 hours went by, and you didn't care anymore. And so like I think making your life revolve around impressing other people that are just going to not care in a couple hours, like, is not a really good way to go. Yeah. I also think that comment you made on social media, it's like it's important to understand that like these are like you're not people aren't posting the bad stuff that happens to them on social media, and people. The ironic part about the comparisons that we make about people on social media is that we assume that they're happier than us. When like, why are you assuming that the millionaire business owner is happier than you when he could be stressed out of his mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really well said. And there's a lot of research that basically shows that well-being does tend to increase. Let's use America and our standard of living as a standard here. Well-being does tend to increase as income increases up, but it tends to become decoupled from increases of income north of around 70,000 a year for an individual in America. In other words, middle class may be starting to move above the midline even of middle class. But after that, it's nice to get that extra bit. But in terms of very measurable impacts on global well-being, it doesn't seem to have much impact on global well-being. To your point, right? Those people are not actually that much happier. So then I think we come back to autonomy and what are your choice? What do you choose your values to be? And I think that's, if I may say, as someone who looks back on his 20s and 30s and sees both good things and also some big mistakes, what are your core values, right? What do you really care about? And if you're chasing stuff that costs a lot to chase in terms of effort, hassle, stress, and crowding out more meaningful things, and it doesn't produce much reward, it's really worth asking, what do you really care about? And I think that we're speaking as well here to that different, those distinctions between process goals and outcome goals, and between intrinsic rewards and extrinsic rewards.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you give some examples of what's like a difference between a process goal versus an outcome goal? Like what's a process goal?
Yeah. Treat like, let's use this right now. I would say, well, I want to treat Brian with respect. I want to show up for this opportunity and not phone it in. I want to keep in my mind the listeners. You have a lot of listeners who will hear this. I'm holding them in my mind and my heart in some ways. Those would be process goals. I want to answer briefly and not go into professor mode with you. Those are process goals. Outcome goals would be something like, how many likes it gets, or how many people share it with others, or what do you think of it, when the dust settles. Those are worth paying attention to and being guided by, but those would be outcome goals. And
what was the other one you said? It was
intrinsic,
external versus
extrinsic. Yeah.
Is that basically the same thing, or is it different?
They overlap. Let's see. So if I'm going to put this, I'll do it so an intrinsic is, how does it feel on the inside? That would be an intrinsic goal. Is it pleasurable? Is it enjoyable? Does it give me a feeling of worth? Is it innately rewarding? For example, feeling loving or caring is innately rewarding. It feels good, right? A sense of your own capabilities and strength, like moxie. I think moxie is really underrated. That's innately enjoyable and rewarding. Okay. An extrinsic goal would be something like, I would love it if people listening would buy my books. All right, that's nice, but that's extrinsic. That's outside me. That's a result typically out there in the world, right? I would say many intrinsic values or rewards have to do with processes, but I could say that if you, let's say, appreciate this conversation and you let me know it, that's a result, that's an outcome that will still produce an intrinsic reward in me, distinct from, let's say, you going out and buying 10 books. That would be, and this all can seem kind of complicated, but if you look really closely, you just ask yourself, wow, what matters most to me? You could do these weird thought experiments. Okay, if I have a year to live, what matters most to me? Or when I look back on my life, I call it, the view from the porch. I'm 95 years old. I'm in good health. It's been a good life. When I look back on the life I've had, what am I going to be really glad that I did? And also, what am I going to be really glad that I did not do? See what I mean? And those are ways into identifying what really matters most. And what you'll usually end up with is that what matters most tends to be process-oriented and intrinsically rewarding. And make sure that those don't get crowded out by what you're bringing up here, Brian. We just don't want to let those get crowded out by being so outcome-oriented around external rewards, external shiny objects like that $1 million by the time you're 25.
Yeah, and like people are basing their happiness on stuff that they have little control over. Like these external things, like that just doesn't sound like a very smart thing to do. Is like you're basing your overall happiness in life over things that you just don't really have control over. And so like that doesn't sound really smart to me, right? And so can you dive into, unless you have any comments on that, but I also want to dive into.
That's my comment.
Thank you. I also want you to dive into more like how do we come up with good intrinsic goals? Like is there a process to determining what is a good intrinsic goal for us?
Yeah. That's a great question. Super. Well, let's see. One would be, who are the people that you respect? And what is it about the way they are? Not what they've achieved, that's external, but how they operate in the world. That's process-oriented, that's intrinsically oriented, just their way of being. That's a way into, okay, what kind of a person do I want to be? That would be one thing. Another thing it would be, what does my heart really long for? In other words, let's say, well, I'd like to be famous. Okay. Or I'd like $1 million. Okay. What would you experience if you were famous? What would you experience if you had $1 million? What would you experience if you married the fairy prince or princess? What would you experience inside? That's the real goal. Those externals are means to those ends. And this is crucially important. In a way, it gets to what you just said a moment ago. We get caught up in the means, but we ignore the ends, right? And so if you ask yourself deep down, what do you really want to feel as you move through your day? What really matters to you deep down inside? What kind of person do you want to experience yourself as being as you move through your day? Lately, I've been tripping on just the word noble. Noble. And not in the, and I'm a Buddhist person, so there's some context for that. The way that the Buddha talked about the noble truths, they're actually not truths that are noble, they're truths for the noble ones, if you think of it that way. And nobility, he was a harsh critic of the caste system and even patriarchy in his way, in his behavior. And for him, nobility was nothing about birth or caste, right, or class, social class. It was about acts of thought, word, and deed. So how can we feel? Like I really like Tony Robbins. I've had family members do his work. I did the fire walk with him, I think in the, early 1980s. And to me, he has a nobility about him. I don't agree with everything he says, and he's a stand-up guy. There's a nobility there. So nobility comes, I think Michelle Obama carries herself with a lot of nobility. The Dalai Lama, Stephen Curry, Steve Kerr, one of the Warriors, a lot of nobility there. So anyway, these are ways into it. That would be a second question. What does my heart long for in terms of what do I want to feel and what kind of a person do I want to be? And then maybe I would just say a last one when you think about how do you identify your values, right? Is to look back on a time when you were really flourishing. Maybe it was like I used to hitchhike, a time you had a deep conversation with someone that just, you were in a zone. The times in your life when you've been in a zone. Okay, great. What are the factors? What was going on inside you, not outside you, inside you, that pulled you into that zone for how you really want to be. Okay, how can you grow those things too?
Yeah, and it's funny because those feelings that you think that those feelings that you're chasing from those like external goals can be achieved by not working 90-hour work weeks, right? Like that feeling, like for example, like connection. That's like a feeling people chase. Importance, those feelings that you're chasing by these external things can be achieved by not. They can be achieved a lot easier than you think, and you can, and that's why I think that goes back to your point of like the striving, like being happy while striving. Like that's really where you want to get to.
That's exactly right. I think about organizations, and you can imagine organizations of different kinds in terms of two dimensions. So high accomplishing, low accomplishing, high well-being, low well-being. And the sweet spot, of course, is the fourth quadrant, high accomplishing, high well-being. That's what we're looking for in ourselves and in the organizations we lead or the places where we want to work. We're looking for both. And I think that's what you're saying here. That's what we're actually looking for. Yeah.
Is there a timeline to happiness? Something like the reason I asked this is because something I heard recently is that like that stage of like 25 to 45 tends to be like not so happy years. And of course, it's probably different for every life, right? There's like life circumstances that happen to people. But is there like a timeline of happiness like when you go throughout life?
Great question as usual. So there's a lot of research on this question. And it's a little hard to measure happiness. People typically do it by self-report, and self-report is vulnerable to all kinds of attitude, stuff like that. But that said, if you were to imagine the lifespan, from all the way across, basically. From memory here, roughly. There's childhood. There's a lot of variation in what happens in childhood and your teen years and all the rest of that. But let's just start it roughly from around age 20, or so. So there tends to be, fairly stable happiness levels that then may have some short-term upticks around career or getting married or, some nice developments in your 20s. On the other hand, there can be a lot of setbacks and struggles and long slogs in your 20s. And then often people have children, and on average, happiness tends to go down some as stresses occur. Also, you start throwing in career, but then on the eve of around 40s and 50s and beyond, until the very end, global well-being tends to rise. So it does track on average what you're saying. Of course, there are a lot of individual variations. And so for me, the question is, okay, back to autonomy and, getting on your own side and being determined on your own behalf, being like a friend to yourself who's a good coach and a good friend. What do you want to do? What's good? What are good guidelines for you, right, in your 20s and, 30s and beyond? Good guiding principles for you. Yeah, and I can talk about that if you like, including from the research.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, listen, I'm
including
just entered
my own
that.
fuck ups, if I'm allowed.
Yeah, you are. The reason, so like, I actually just entered that age of those like 25 to 45. So I'm looking forward to it, right? If we're talking about that, it goes down here with stress and stuff. What's your advice to me as someone who's just entering that period?
Well, first, if you're just 25 or so, you're already really far along, and it's real. And just that's good. So
but can I say something important here? I don't always feel that way, and I think that's important. Where it's like, no matter how far you are, it's that comparison trap that we were just talking about, right?
Oh, I know, I do. It's poignant. I've dealt with that myself too. Well, since you asked, stop me and if I start sliding into professor mode, and I'll break this up kind of quickly, okay? So first off, a research frame on adult development. It's pretty cool. People can look it up from originating a guy named Daniel Levinson. Gail Sheehy wrote in the 70s and 60s. Gail Sheehy wrote a book, Passages, about it. Basically, the idea is that adult development tends to move forward in these cycles of organization, disorganization, and reorganization. So you have these rhythms, and they're normal. You put it together, and then it kind of falls apart. And then you look around, and then you create something new. The phoenix rises from those ashes in a rhythmic kind of way. And along the way, there are certain, stages that tend to be common on that journey. In the 20s, commitments tend to be tentative. They're significant. We're putting ourselves into them. But there's a certain amount of regrouping. Typically around our 30s, people tend to settle into what their career will be, or they're, as I did late in life, settle into graduate school in their 30s for their career in their 40s and onward. And often they'll do pair bonding, unless they're into serial monogamy or massive polyamory along the way. That's kind of a rhythm. So the question becomes then, okay, how can I do organizing well? What would help me to organize in my life? And then on the other hand, if I'm going through a phase where I really need to let things fall apart a bit, or I need to really think newly, I need to walk away from tunnels in which there's no cheese. I'm never going to get promoted in this company. This is a good fill in the blank man or woman I'm in a relationship with, but they're just not the person I want to be with for the rest of my life for whatever reason. Do that well and then reorganize. So that might sound kind of abstract, but it's a good broad principle. And accept the necessity sometimes that things are going to change. And I think these days, actually, unlike, my dad's dad was born on a ranch and was going to be a rancher his whole life. And, my dad's dad wanted my dad to be a rancher, but my dad saw the Great Depression and walked away and became a zoologist eventually. So just accept. That these days people have usually 2.5 careers. Okay, so far, 1. Then 2, to me, what's your why for not, frankly, jumping off a bridge? Life has pain. Life has loss, right? Why do we keep going? Right? And we're exposed to risks. There's a Zen proverb, why do trees wither and leaves fall? And the answer, very Zen, is body exposed in the golden wind. To enjoy the gold of the wind, we have to live exposed. And sometimes that wind is cold and harsh. We have to live that way. So why stick around? Well, to me, the answer boils down to 3 kinds of why. Know your why. One kind of why is quality of life, which includes everything from apple pie a la mode to being in love, quality of life, values, broadly, right? Then second, our service values. Independent of quality of life, even if it brings down our quality of life, we want to help. We're going to stand by the bedside of our aging and sick parent. We're going to go to work in a refugee camp. We're going to, help someone over here, even if it pisses off someone over there who will then retaliate against us. We choose service values, benevolence values. That's cool. And then the third why is also independent of either of those, although it overlaps, learning values, including healing and awakening. Learning. What do you want to learn? Okay. So to me, those are 3 kinds of why, and they're good to really consider for yourself and to ask yourself, how's my quality of life? How's my service? And how's my learning? Okay, so far. You want my last one about career?
Yes.
Are you sure? Okay, good. This will be quick. I really screwed up on my career. I drifted in my 20s. I made choices that I grew a lot from, but cost me a decade, really. And that you cannot recover that decade when you're in your 50s. It's just, okay, everybody else is 10 years ahead of you, roughly. And then what do you do? And it's harder and harder to get into the main current of career in your 40s and 50s than it is in your 20s, let's say. So here's some advice that I learned. 1, take the long view and realize that the costs of building whatever you're trying to build for your career, your occupation, will be amortized across the whole 50-year lifespan of your career these days. So grad school, apprenticeships, investing in training, investing in yourself, investing in a business, putting up with sleeping on the floor, and eating noodle ramen every day. Suck it up. Realize those costs are real for those years, but they will be distributed, paid off over 40, 50-year lifespan. But the benefits that you accrue from investing in yourself in those ways will compound over the 40, 50 years of your lifespan. And, that's a really useful way to understand it. And then last, if you're trying to decide what to do, I think about the sweet spot that's at the intersection of three circles. What are you really naturally talented at? You're just inherently really good at it, distinct from acquired skills. Okay? Second circle, what do you love doing? Doesn't have to be related to work or money. Just what do you love doing? What lights you up? It's intrinsically rewarding, right? And then the third circle is, what do you care about? What are your moral principles and values? What do you want to help in the world? Children, whales, the environment, politics, whatever it is, right? Well, if you think the intersection of those three circles, what your talents, your loves, and your values, that intersection is the sweet spot. And the rest is details from there around money, where do you want to live, what kind of company do you want to be in. But if you're at the center of those three circles, you're going to be good to go. Okay.
That's great. That's amazing. Can you walk us through the negativity bias? Because even that statement I made earlier about I don't always feel that way, the root of that is this negativity bias, right? And it's always, even when things are going well, it's always searching out for the negative. Even if there's people that would die to be in a position that you're in, or even if your past self would die to be the position that you're in, you can still have this negativity bias. Can you walk us through why that happens?
Oh yeah, great. So it's one of the most useful and robust findings in 20, 30 years in neuroscience and evolutionary neuropsychology. Short version is that our ancestors, Stone Age, 100 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago, 100 million years ago, they needed to get carrots and avoid sticks. Carrots like food, mating opportunities, sticks like predators, hazards, and aggression between bands and in their band, carrots and sticks. The difference is that if you don't get a carrot today, you'll have a chance at one tomorrow. But in the wild, if you fail to avoid that stick today, whack, no more carrots forever. So negative events, even if they are less common than positive events, have greater urgency and impact. Positive events have a quantity effect, negative events have a quality effect. And so the brain, built by Mother Nature over 600 million years in the crucible of really harsh conditions, is designed to do 5 things automatically that you can notice in your own experience. 1, scan for bad news, outside and inside. So we're always looking for threat, including expectations. What will happen if I don't achieve, if I don't impress someone today, what will happen if, okay? Or those funny twinges in your body. So you're scanning for bad news, or what's bubbling up in awareness, like trauma history, what's bubbling up there. Second, we over-focus on it. We zero in on the one light flashing red in the inner mosaic of all the things that are true in our life these days. That's when we focus on. That's partly why, as Barbara Fredrickson showed, in terms of research on positive emotions, that when we're in an emotionally positive state, basic well-being, just kind of ordinary mild well-being, the perceptual field is really open and people can be much more creative then. It's when we're anxious or irritated or sad or lonely or hurt or feeling inadequate, we curl around the pain. Okay? That's the second. Third, we overreact to it. Right? People react more to loss than to gain. People react more to pain than to pleasure. People react more to punishment than to reward. We react more to negative interactions than to positive ones, etc. And then fourth, negative experiences are prioritized for storage in emotional memory. They go whoop in. But meanwhile, ordinary positive experiences, including like we were talking about, of those ordinary jewels in everyday life. You got something done, someone appreciated you, you performed well, you tracked some good intentions inside yourself. Those experiences wash through the brain like water through a sieve, typically, unless it's $1 million moment. So that's the fourth thing. And the fifth is that, unfortunately, cortisol is released, stress hormone, when we're pissed off or scared or feeling just pressured. Cortisol is released. And yeah, it keeps us alive while going up into your brain with a 1-2 punch. Cortisol in your brain sensitizes the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala. Technically, there are two of them, one on either side. People speak of them as in the singular. So now that alarm bell is more sensitive and it's louder. Meanwhile, cortisol weakens and can eventually kill neurons in a nearby part of the brain, the hippocampus, which calms down the amygdala. And the hippocampus also tells the hypothalamus to quit calling for stress hormones. Enough already. So if you weaken the hippocampus, you weaken its capacity to calm down the amygdala and calm down the hypothalamus. Okay? That creates a vicious cycle. Stressful, upsetting, irritating, pressured experiences today make us a little more triggered by them tomorrow, which then makes us even more sensitive to them the day after that. That's a vicious cycle. That's the negativity bias. Thank you, Mother Nature. It's her gift for Stone Agers and those of us living back in Jurassic Park. Okay, it's useful today if you're living in a war zone or working in a war zone or growing up in a war zone or what feels like a war zone. But for most people, most of the time, like you were saying, Brian, it creates unnecessary suffering. And it makes us get all caught up in, that tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of most people's lives that is truly negative amidst everything else that's actually positive. Finishing on a little example, for the Academy Awards, 10, 15 years ago, I think it was ABC, they did a show on the Academy Awards, including why do so many movie stars say, wildly popular, Tom Hanks level people, why do they remember that one bad review they got in summer theater 30 years ago, and they don't remember any of the positive reviews they've gotten or the rewards, awards they've received, like the Oscars. And so they actually interviewed me about it, in my own little office, just why do people do that? And so that's an example of, great athletes. They're going to remember that one shot they missed, at the buzzer and could have put them in the next round of the playoffs. I'm thinking back on the Golden State Warriors game with the Houston Rockets last night, I think game 4, where at the buzzer there were 2 missed shots from the Rockets that could have turned the game, and they would have won it. So, and those guys are going to remember that missed shot, even though those guys are incredible basketball players.
I feel like truly understanding deep down what you just said is honestly a very important step to stopping the negativity bias, because once that comes in your head, knowing that that's a common default trait of you as a human can help. It can help you just stop it in the moment, right? So I feel like that just understanding deeply what you just said is such a powerful first step to stopping that negativity bias. Is there anything after that we should do?
That's great. Yeah, great, Brian. A couple points. First, there's nothing in what we're saying that's about positive thinking and rose-colored glasses. We need to deal with the bad inside us, in the world, injustice, racism, poverty, global warming, inside ourselves. That funny little lump, under your shoulder, go get it checked, deal with the bad. That person who doesn't treat you with respect, deal with the bad. While also, second, turn to the good that's also true. Not to overlook the bad, but if anything, to strengthen yourself to deal with the bad, as well as for its own sake. Turn to the good that is also true. Recognize what is also true. Force your perceptual field to widen out from that one red light flashing. And third, take in the good. This is really, really important. I said it quickly in passing. People can look up a paper I wrote called Learning to Learn from Positive Experiences that has all the science behind this, very legit. Basically, if we slow down for a few seconds, ideally longer. There's a saying, neurons that fire together can wire together. So the longer they're firing, the more intensively they're firing, the more pervasively they're firing in your body, the more they're going to be wiring as well. So in this way, when we are having something beneficial, we're experiencing it, usually mild, authentically though, in the moment, rather than letting it wash through that sieve, as is the default. Slow down to kind of capture it and receive it into yourself. Not out of clinging and so forth, but actually out of filling yourself up, letting yourself receive the nutrients, the psychological nutrients that you long for, and which actually make you stronger and more capable of really succeeding at a high level in this life. Slow down to take in the good. And then if you do that, Mother Nature is biased toward the negative. If you're not seeing what I'm doing, I'm creating a tilted playing field here. So if we tilt deliberately toward looking for legitimate opportunities to feel good in various ways, and then if we deliberately slow down half a dozen times a day or more, 5-10 seconds at a time to receive them, we're leveling the playing field. And all that will help us be happier. It will also make us more resilient and stronger and more able to deal with the crud of life. That's how to really address the negativity bias. The brain is like Velcro for the bad, but Teflon for the good. With deliberate effort, and here again, autonomy, choice, inner freedom, with deliberate effort, we can create a brain that's like Velcro for the good and Teflon for the bad.
Hmm. What's your advice to someone who feels like a loser?
I would give you the advice I gave myself and then practiced. This is very poignant. There are degrees of this. In depression, there's often a sense, deep depression, including sometimes suicidal depression, a sense of worthlessness, brokenness, despair, unrepairable damage, And so if you're listening and this is you, talk to somebody. It can be changed. It's not true. No one is irreparably damaged. Factually, deep down inside everyone, without being spiritual about it, just you can look directly, there is an inherent awareness, an inherent wakefulness that has qualities of kindness woven into it, and an inner peace and a strength and a wisdom. That can never be destroyed. It's inherent. Bad things can be done to you. You can do bad things to yourself. You can do bad things to other people. All that happens above that layer. You carry that layer with you your whole life. 1. 2, if you were mistreated, in other words, we develop these feelings because we were mistreated, because there was the presence of the bad and the absence of the good, because no baby is born feeling like a loser. It's the shit that happens to us, and that gets then amplified and ruminated on and reinforced in your brain. That's what makes us feel like a loser. So 1, we can step back from those feelings. Just like you were saying earlier, stepping back from the negativity bias, we feel the feelings, right? We're not trying to suppress them, but as soon as we're mindfully aware of them, in a kind of spaciousness of awareness, they're no longer getting reinforced. If anything, they're starting to associate with a more peaceful witnessing. Right? If you kind of follow that, over here is this feeling of inadequacy and shame, and desperation, let's say. But over here, I'm witnessing that. I'm not identified with it. I'm watching the movie. I'm not glued to the screen. That's a crucial difference right there. That's 50% of all mental health practices, is getting that observing spaciousness that has qualities in it of accepting. I don't like what's happening, but it's real, it's here, it's now, and compassion for yourself, a friendliness and a supportiveness toward yourself, not just a dismissiveness toward yourself. which is what a lot of people do to themselves, even if they're nurturing and kind to other people, because when they were young, they were dismissed. They're, in various kinds of ways, from peers, caregivers, parents, and so on. So observe it and name it to yourself. Research shows, name it to tame it. Research shows that if you name what you're feeling, like inadequate, worthless, run to the litter, broken, whatever, just a simple label, that creates some space around it. You're not agreeing with that label. You're just naming what's there. That's really great. I could say another thing or two if it's okay.
Yeah.
There's what we feel in the moment. There's what we do in the moment when we feel like crud. And then there's what do we grow over time. And what's most important if you feel like a loser is what you're growing over time. So that tomorrow or a week from tomorrow, when something happens that triggers you, like you see somebody with their first $1 million, at 25 on Facebook or something, and you get triggered, as you grow these strengths inside, you will get less hammered by that trigger. There will be less reactivity. Right? So it's really important. What are you trying to grow inside? So a lot of research on this and a lot of really helpful stuff, including freely offered at my website and elsewhere. How do you grow the sense of worth inside yourself, right? And I would just say the super short summary of, a lot you can do, but you can really help yourself this way. And I did it for myself. You can deliberately look for genuine experiences today that will fill the hole in your heart. No baby is born feeling like a loser. So there's that hole in the heart. And so today, when you have little opportunities to feel of worth, like I feel your respect here, Brian, and you're tracking what I'm saying. We didn't know each other before this. It's not more than what it is, but it's not less than what it is. That's an opportunity for me to fill my own hole in the heart that I had. It was a huge one when I landed in college, and so on. So look for those opportunities to feel it and to slow down to really receive it in yourself. It may take a while to fill that hole in your heart, but over time you really can build up an inner sense of worth and quality and all the rest of that. And then if you're ambitious and you can do this without getting hijacked, you can do what I call linking. It's a major method in psychotherapy and elsewhere, where you're aware of two things at the same time. You're aware of, let's say, being liked or loved or approved of by others, or maybe aware of some good quality in yourself. So you're having a positive experience of your own worth. That's big in the foreground of awareness. And you can get a sense of it connecting with and even making contact with younger layers inside you that felt like a loser. And when you're aware of both of those at once, over, a breath or two or 5 breaths in a row, maybe longer if you want, the big positive experience starts to associate with that old negative experience kept off to the side. So the positive experience wins. And gradually the positive experience will soothe and even eventually replace that negative experience. As we go through life, we want to, if the mind's like a garden, we can witness it mindfully. That's good. We can pull weeds in it. We can let go of those old beliefs. We can realize that they're just wrong. And we can grow flowers in the garden of the mind that I'm talking about here. And we can even use those flowers, in my last suggestion, to pull the weeds.
I feel like just having that hope that things can change is such a crucial step. And I feel like a lot of people get stuck in having existential crises over temporary situations. And when you do that, like, I feel like you're robbing yourself of giving yourself that hope to change, right? And like understanding that the spot you're at right now is not final, and that like life is fluid and like things change a lot, and that like you're not stuck in the situation that you're at. But then the other side of that is that when things are going good, that it can also take a turn as well. And so it's just balance you have to fight of like of not having too much negativity bias, but also not being delusional in the positive. Does that make sense?
Oh, super well said. And along the way, invest in yourself. You know, what's the primary origin point for whatever good occurs in your life? It's yourself. It's your character. It's your mind. It's your skills. It's what you've developed inside yourself, and it's also what the world lands on. You know, it's interesting. Like during COVID, I observed that a lot of people were in trouble because they were being shored up by extrinsics. The friends they could hang out with, the movies they could see, the restaurants they could go to, bars, have fun, da-da. It was externals, travel, externals. And with COVID, those externals fell away, and then what people are left with is what's intrinsically inside themselves. And for a lot of folks, they looked inside and was like, whoa, Mother Hubbard's cupboard is a little too bare. I don't have inherently a lot of self-worth, a lot of contentment, a lot of inner peace. I don't have it. And all that was sort of shored up as long as I could keep, the dance going. But when the music stopped, so to me, huge takeaway, especially for younger people. And that goes to my point about the cost of investing in yourself is amortized over the long haul, but the benefits compound exponentially over the same period. Yeah, what are you trying to grow inside yourself these days? What are you trying to heal and grow? And that is really helpful to just, without getting all self-absorbed about it, just know what are the one or two things that are your high-value targets that you're focused on healing these days and also developing inside yourself. And sometimes that's a 2-for-1, like developing a sense of self-worth, to grow that, in part to heal old feelings of being a loser.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that younger people have about being an adult?
That it will happen for only a short time.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. And, these days, normal lifespan, in the 80s, in developed countries, certainly. And, it's hard to realize, I think, when you're in your 20s, how long that is. When you're in your 70s, like I'm 72, you look back and you go, as many people do, I actually don't, but many, many people say, whoa, it just flew right by. So that's looking back. But prospectively, it's a long run. And so what am I trying to say about that? So I think that's a misconception that has implications. I'd love to hear what you think. Like I did an exercise once with this 16-year-old, young, maybe 17 young woman. Anyway, I said, okay, let's take a piece of paper. I turned it sideways, and I said, let's just mark the years. She was sort of sweating. What am I trying to do? Where am I going? Who am I trying to be? What am I becoming? Right, there you go. And I said, let's just lay it out. And each little row was a year, took it out mid-40s and beyond. She was already in shock at the prospect of actually being 45 someday. I say, you want to be 45, let me tell you. You want to be 85 if you can. Who wants to be 100? Someone who's 99. Go for it. And that really impressed upon her the long haul. And you start to realize, I can work backwards. If I'd like to be kind of roughly here, not being all crazed about it, but yeah, I'd like to be settled down in a good relationship. And I sure like the option of being able to have children then if I want to, if I'm with the right person and the stars are aligned. What needs to happen now that I'm 28? Whoa, I need to start zeroing in on, stabilizing with somebody and being married by the time I'm 31, let's say. It suddenly kind of gets real, or you start thinking about, pardon me, the realities of retiring. I had saved no money to speak of by the time I was in my early 50s. And I had ignored and rebelled against my Depression-era parents' advice. Dude, start saving, even $10 a week, in your 20s. I was in trouble. And that can, force some choices that turned out okay, as it turned out. But, look ahead, to things like that. So I think the long run, I would just say that. Gosh, and then I would also say, avoid catastrophic mistakes. I got lucky a few times where I easily could have been killed, in wilderness, rock climbing type stuff, car accident type stuff, driving over the limit, definitely type stuff, being in bad situations, dangerous situations, bad stuff. And I've made mistakes, I'll spare you the gory details, with people in my life as well. And also catastrophic mistakes, for yourself. Don't waste your 20s. That doesn't mean you'd have to stress out and work 60 hours a week to become partner of the law firm, right? If you don't really care about that. But I mean, yeah, don't make big mistakes as much as you can. Avoid making big mistakes. Don't get a felony. Don't have a major life-changing injury. Don't end up, don't burn 3 years of your life in a cult, which I did in your 20s. That's consequential.
I would go there, but we're running out of time. That sounds like a long story. So my last question for you is, if you had a minute with your younger self, what would you tell him? I'm assuming it's very similar to the stuff you just said, but if you had 1 minute, what would you say?
Lighten up. Know that you are already good. And enjoy the ride.